I knew it was coming the second he leaned back in his chair and smirked. "If you've got a problem, walk out," my manager scoffed. Like 20 years of service was nothing more than a napkin he could toss after lunch. 20 years. 2 decades of late nights, broken deadlines, last-minute deployments, and Band-Aid fixes I'd been the one to patch. My name wasn't on the website, not on the investor decks, not even in the footnotes of the press releases. But my fingerprints? They were in every line of code, every system that company depended on. And this boy, because that's what he was, a boy with an MBA and a cologne addiction, thought he could dismiss me like I was overhead. He didn't even try to hide the disdain. "You've been here too long, Lisa," he said, flipping my performance folder like it was a diner menu. "We need people who are agile, adaptable. If you can't handle the direction we're going, the door's right there." The door, funny word, isn't it? After 20 years, you'd think it would at least be a farewell, a thank you, a gold watch. Not a door. I didn't rage, didn't argue. I felt something colder than anger, a kind of bone-deep stillness that made me sit straighter in my chair. I thought about all the birthdays I'd missed for this job, the weekends where my daughter's voice was a memory on voicemail because I was stuck in the server room. The time my husband begged me to take one night off to celebrate our anniversary, and I couldn't because the system went down. I sacrificed. And here I was, being told to walk out. So I did. No scene. No tears. I closed my laptop, slid it into my bag, and stood up. The silence in that office was heavy. The kind of silence that drags everything down with it. Respect, loyalty, history. People watched from behind glass conference walls, pretending not to notice. Pretending not to see their future in me. I walked past my team. The same engineers I'd once defended when management wanted to cut corners. Past HR. The same woman who once asked me to mentor her nephew. Nobody said a word. Nobody dared. Silence has gravity. And that day, it was crushing. I didn't go straight home. Not yet. Instead, I found myself at the diner down the street, sliding into a cracked red vinyl booth I'd sat in 100 times before during crunch nights. The waitress didn't ask, just brought me a black coffee. Same as always. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat there breathing, the bitterness of the coffee steadying me. Lexora, that company, had been my whole life. I joined when it was barely more than a handful of idealists in a rented office above a pawn shop. We ate takeout off cardboard boxes and dreamed too big for our paychecks. I'd watched it grow into a multi-million-dollar machine. And all of it, the infrastructure, the architecture, the core logic, was built on my foundation. I didn't need to scream into the void that afternoon, because I was the void now. They had no idea what they'd just thrown away. By the time I walked back to my apartment, the sun was dipping behind the skyline, and the city looked like a snow globe of glass towers. I dropped my bag by the door, poured myself a bourbon, and sat at the dining table staring at the manila folder they'd handed me, my so-called termination package. But my attention wasn't on the folder. It was on the drawer beneath it. A drawer I hadn't opened in years. Inside, under tax forms and forgotten coupons, was a slim brown envelope. No label, just weight. And inside that envelope, the provisional patent filings from 2003. My name at the top, not the company's. See, back in the chaos of those early days, I'd taken a mentor's advice, an old patent attorney who told me to keep the provisional rights under my name until things settled. But things at Lexora never settled. They just got bigger, greedier, messier. Nobody ever followed up on that little technicality. Nobody thought it mattered. Until now. Because tucked into that filing was a clause. One tiny paragraph buried in the legalese like a landmine. In the event of involuntary termination without cause, ownership of the patent shall revert to the inventor within 24 hours. Guess what, manager? You just pulled the pin. I leaned back in my chair, the bourbon burning in my throat, and I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't vengeance. Not yet. It was preparation. That night, I drafted an email to my old mentor, scanned the filing, and asked a single question. Does this still stand? I didn't know it then, but by the time the sun rose, my phone would be buzzing so hard it might crack the nightstand. 183 missed calls. And the founder himself, a man who hadn't spoken to me in 5 years, would be screaming into the receiver, "Why the hell are you registered as the owner of our patents?" And I would smile. Because silence sometimes is strategy. When my mentor finally called me back, I was still in yesterday's clothes. Hoodie, leggings, hair tied back in a knot that had survived 2 nights of restless sleep. The bourbon glass was still on the table, half empty, a ring of amber staining the wood. I answered on the first ring. "Lisa," he said. His voice was gravelly now, older, softer. Retirement in Arizona had aged him into something calmer. I looked at the filing. "You kept the clause." "Does it still stand?" I asked. He paused. I could hear the shuffling of papers, the sound of glasses being pushed up the bridge of his nose. "Yes," he said finally. "It's airtight." "If they terminated you without cause, ownership reverted to you the moment you walked out." I didn't breathe for a second. "So, it's mine?" "It's yours," he confirmed. "Every line of code tied to that patent, every licensing deal, every investor deck, they're squatting on something they no longer own." I sat back, the words pressing down on me like a weight and a release at the same time. Mine. After 2 decades of being background noise, duct tape, the loyal dog, I wasn't just free. I was holding the foundation of their empire. By mid-morning, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Emails, messages, voicemails stacking one on top of another. The first one I opened was from HR. "Please complete your exit survey within 24 hours. Exit survey. As if I was rating a hotel stay. Then came the texts from coworkers. "So sorry, Lisa. Please stay in touch." Or worse, "Greg said you wanted to leave anyway. Hope you're happy." That one stung, because it told me the lies had already started. But the call that changed everything came a little later. Unknown number. I knew it before I picked up. The founder. "Lisa," he barked. No greeting, no small talk, just raw panic. "Why the hell are you registered as the owner of our patents?" I let the silence sit there for a beat. Then I said evenly, "Because I always was." You just forgot he didn't reply right away. I could hear him pacing, breathing hard. No, that can't be right. Legal never filed the final transfer." I interrupted. "We talked about it after Series A, remember? But it got shuffled, then forgotten. 20 years later, it's still mine." Jesus Christ. He groaned like an animal hit center mass. "Do you understand what this means?" "Oh, I do," I said quietly. He didn't apologize. Didn't ask how I was. His voice cracked only once when he muttered, "The board's gonna kill me." Then he hung up. I set my phone down, stared at the blank wall in front of me, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. That afternoon, I opened the drawer again, pulled out the old bank box labeled IP/archive/do not touch. For hours, I sat cross-legged on the floor, sifting through brittle printouts, coffee-stained notebooks, Post-its with my handwriting from 2003. It was like digging through an archaeological site of my own life. At the bottom, I found it. Manila envelope, still sealed with a notary stamp. My provisional filing. My name, my invention. I scanned it, encrypted it, and filed the reversion confirmation through the patent office portal. No drama. No fireworks. Just a quiet checkbox next to involuntary termination without cause and a digital timestamp. Submit. And with that single click, everything shifted. Lexora's flagship system, the core engine that powered their contracts, their demos, their next round of funding, no longer theirs. It was mine. I didn't dance. Didn't cheer. I just leaned back, my cat jumping into my lap like she understood the gravity of what I'd done. The phone buzzed again. This time it was Greg. Of course it was. The boy who told me to walk out. I didn't answer. Let him stew. By the end of the day, the legal team at Lexora would have the reversion notice in their inbox. But here's the thing about companies like that. Legal only checks what executives tell them to check. And executives? They were too busy congratulating themselves in conference rooms, high-fiving each other over strategy decks. Tick, tick, tick. That night, I sat by the window with another bourbon, watching the city glow beneath me. 20 years of service, erased with a smirk. But the thing about foundations is, you can't erase them. You can't fire the architect and expect the house to stand. I wasn't angry anymore. I was still, cold, focused. Because silence isn't weakness. Sometimes silence is strategy. And my silence had just become their problem. Tomorrow they'd find out, and I'd be waiting. The next morning, I woke to silence. Not peaceful silence. The heavy kind, like the world is holding its breath. My phone lay face down on the nightstand, buzzing in short bursts. When I finally turned it over, the screen was littered with notifications, missed calls, emails, Slack messages from accounts I was no longer part of. I didn't open any of them. Not yet. Instead, I brewed coffee, the kind strong enough to peel paint and watch the steam curl like smoke from a slow fire. The truth was simple. The patent was mine again, but the impact of that truth hadn't hit Lexora yet. That was only a matter of time. Around mid-morning, my curiosity got the better of me. I logged into the public patent database. There it was, plain as day. Owner, Lisa M. Carter. Effective date. Yesterday. My heart gave a steady, deliberate thump. Not excitement, not nerves, just confirmation. By the time I checked my email, one stood out. Forwarded from a friend still inside Lexora. Subject line, possible issue. It had been written by a junior intern in legal, the kind of over-eager kid who wears pressed shirts on casual Fridays. He'd been tasked with monitoring competitor filings. Instead, he typed in our own numbers. And there I was. I could almost picture the moment. His mouth going dry, the highlighter freezing mid-swipe. Probably refreshing the page 3 times, praying it was a glitch. But it wasn't. He flagged it to his supervisor. The supervisor flagged it to the general counsel. And from there, panic started to seep through the cracks. By early afternoon, legal had circulated a memo. Another friend forwarded it to me. Half terrified, half amused. The last line said it all. Recommendation, postpone demo until IP ownership clarified. Demo, of course. The next-gen product launch was less than a week away, hyped in press releases, teased in glossy emails. The core engine, the one I wrote in a cramped apartment with ramen wrappers on the floor, was the centerpiece. They'd been bragging for months about how it would redefine adaptive infrastructure. And now, they didn't own it. I could imagine the executive's reaction. Some laughed it off. Clerical error, paperwork mix-up. Others probably insisted it could be ironed out later. But the truth was, there was no later. The clause was ironclad. My mentor had been smart enough to bury it where only a meticulous reader would find it. And now, after 20 years, the tripwire had finally gone off. My phone rang again. Greg, I let it ring. He left a voicemail this time, his voice straining to sound calm. Lisa, let's be reasonable. I think we can work something out. Call me back reasonable. That was rich, coming from the man who'd told me to walk out like I was yesterday's lunch. I didn't delete the voicemail. I saved it. That evening, word started spreading beyond the legal department. Engineers messaged me on LinkedIn, pretending to check in, but their real question was the same. What happened? One even wrote, Greg says you quit. Is that true? Quit? Number, I was shoved out. But I didn't reply. Not yet. Let them stew in their confusion. Let them feel that itch in the back of their skulls, the sense that something was off. As the sun set, I imagined the scene inside Lixora. The interns whispering, the mid-level managers suddenly staying late, the executives too proud to admit they were terrified. The next-gen demo loomed over them like a storm cloud, and they were building a stage on ground that wasn't theirs. And me? I sat in my apartment, bourbon in hand, watching the city lights blink on one by one. 20 years of my life had been given to that company. Loyalty, sacrifice, nights spent at my desk instead of home with my family. They'd tossed me aside without a second thought. But now, for the first time in 2 decades, I wasn't powerless. I wasn't the background character, the loyal employee, the duct tape holding their fragile empire together. I was the architect. And they had just fired the architect without checking who owned the blueprints. Before I went to bed, I checked the patent site one more time. My name gleamed back at me. Black and white, undeniable. The foundation was mine. The house was theirs. And the cracks were spreading. Tomorrow they'd break. 3 days later, Lixora's big demo day arrived. I wasn't in the building, of course. I didn't need to be. But I knew exactly how it looked. Sleek banners, polished concrete floors, a 30-foot LED screen glowing with the words, "Next is now." Rows of investors, government liaisons, venture partners, all the people whose signatures and checkbooks kept the machine running. And backstage? Greg, my replacement, my executioner. Probably pacing with a mic clipped to his tie, rehearsing lines he barely understood. He'd been waiting for this moment, the chance to prove himself as the face of innovation. Only problem? He was about to pitch a product built on code that didn't legally belong to him. I wasn't there to see it, but I heard everything. Friends still inside kept me updated in real time. Messages trickled in like play-by-play commentary. Stage looks packed. Greg is all smiles. Investors just walked in. Then came the one that made me sit up straight. Legal just walked on stage. Apparently, Greg had only just started his speech. He'd launched into some syrupy line about redefining infrastructure when a tall woman from legal stepped out of the wings. She leaned in, whispered something directly into his ear. And whatever she said drained the blood from his face. The mic was still on. Everyone in the first few rows heard it. "We can't demo that system. We don't own the patent anymore," silence. Thick, jagged silence. The kind that doesn't just hang in the air, it cuts through it. Greg laughed too loud, trying to play it off. "Small technical hiccup," he told the crowd. "Just give us a moment." He stepped aside with legal, his mic picking up the hiss of panic in his voice. "What are you talking about?" "We've always owned that code." The reply was calm, cold, undeniable. "No, we never did. Lisa Carter owns it." The reversion is live phones lit up in the audience. Investors pulled up the patent database right there on their laps. And within seconds, my name was everywhere. Projected onto phone screens, whispered in corners, printed across impromptu handouts that had been forwarded to the entire room. I wasn't in the auditorium, but my presence filled it. One investor, a woman from Draper Partners, stood up mid-row, holding a sheet of paper above her head. "I believe this is the current patent registration," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "It lists Lisa Carter as the owner." That was the moment the demo collapsed. Greg stammered, reaching for excuses. "This is a misunderstanding. We're in the process of—" But no one was listening. Eyes weren't on him anymore. They were scanning the documents, sharing whispers, piecing it together. The product, the very system Lixora had been promising for months, was built on intellectual property they no longer owned. In the back of the room, the founder himself, Hal, stood with arms crossed. He didn't speak, didn't need to. His presence alone was enough. Witnesses said his face was unreadable, but his silence was louder than any shouting could have been. Meanwhile, legal stood at Greg's side, motionless, refusing to back him up. They knew the truth, and they weren't about to let their signatures end careers. The LED screen froze on a blank placeholder. The audience murmured. No one applauded. The silence grew heavier, more suffocating by the second. And me? I was at home on my porch, bourbon in hand, my cat curled at my feet. My phone buzzed with updates. Demo canceled. Board meeting called immediately. Greg looks like he's about to collapse. I didn't smile. Not yet. I just sat there, watching the sunset burn red over the skyline, thinking about all the nights I'd sacrificed for a company that erased me with a smirk. They hadn't fired an employee. They'd evicted the architect. And now the foundation was gone. That evening, more calls came through. Greg, 3 times. Legal, twice. Even Marcy from Product sent a sad face emoji, followed by, "Hey, are you okay?" I didn't answer. Not a single one. Because silence had become my greatest weapon. And tomorrow, it wouldn't just be a failed demo haunting them. Tomorrow, the board would finally understand what Greg had done. And the reckoning would begin. The morning after the demo collapsed, I woke to a phone that wouldn't stop shaking on my nightstand. When I turned it over, the lock screen didn't even show names anymore. Just numbers. 200 missed calls. Voicemails stacked so high the counter stopped keeping track. I didn't listen. Not at first. I poured myself coffee, stretched out on the couch, my cat pressing against my legs like she knew something cosmic had shifted. The city outside was quiet, but I knew inside Lexora's walls, it was chaos. Finally, one name caught my eye. Hal, the founder. I called him back. He picked up on the first ring. No greeting, no pleasantries. Just a voice like sandpaper and thunder. "Lisa, what do you want?" Not "can we fix this?" Not "I'm sorry." Not even "let's negotiate." He already knew those questions didn't matter anymore. I didn't answer him on the phone. Instead, 10 minutes later, I sent an email. Subject line: terms. The body was short, sharp, surgical. No legal jargon, no filler. Full buyout rights for Lexora Systems to Relicant's patent number 79864322. An 8-figure royalty agreement, retroactive to the date of termination. A seat on the board with voting privileges. Non-negotiable. I ended it with a single sentence. This is not revenge. This is realignment. I hit send. No signature, no warmth, just truth. For hours, there was silence. The kind that settles into your bones, heavy and certain. I pictured them in that glass boardroom, papers spread across the table, investors demanding answers, lawyers whispering worst-case scenarios. And then came the reply. 4 words. We accept. All terms. I didn't answer right away. I let them sweat. Let them think I might change my mind. Only after a full hour did I send my response. I'll need a fresh badge. And my nameplate returned. You'll find it in Greg's desk drawer. Second one down. He never threw it away. Just hid it. That detail wasn't for leverage. It was for me. Proof that even the man who told me to walk out hadn't truly erased me. He couldn't. By evening, the paperwork was already moving. Licensing agents drafting contracts. HR scrambling to rewrite policies. Lawyers combing every old filing for overlooked clauses. My inbox filled with carefully worded apologies disguised as compliance notices. I didn't feel triumph, exactly. More like vindication. After 20 years of loyalty, of sacrifice, of being the silent backbone of their empire, I was finally recognized. Not with applause, not with a plaque, but with respect, equity, and leverage they could never take away again. That night, I sat by the window, bourbon in hand, watching the skyline flicker. My cat purred against my side. The silence that had crushed me days before was still there, but now it belonged to me. The next day, news of the board's decision leaked. Industry blogs lit up. Lexora Systems restructures after failed demo. Patent reverts to longtime engineer. Founder forced to concede control. My name wasn't in the headlines yet, but it was in the contracts, in the legal filings, in every late-night meeting they were scrambling to hold. And Greg? Word was, he cleaned out his desk quietly. No farewell speech, no smirk, just a man whose arrogance finally caught up with him. I didn't gloat. I didn't post a victory speech online. That wasn't the point. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming what was mine and proving a truth too many people forget. You cannot erase the architect and expect the house to stand. By the end of the week, my new badge arrived in the mail. Plain plastic, my name etched across the front. I held it in my hand for a long time, feeling the weight of it. Not a symbol of belonging anymore, but of ownership. I clipped it to my shirt, sat back down at my desk, and opened a fresh notebook. On the first page, I wrote a sentence in bold letters. Some of us don't burn bridges. We build new cities, and we charge rent. Then I closed the notebook and smiled. Because silence, used wisely, is louder than any applause. And this time, the silence was mine.